not gonna lie, I always use the comment section, and I scribble some crazy things in there, and I was like, they're definitely gonna see my comments. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Isabel Orozco Piedrahita, and my presentation is called Tejiendo, Reconciliation, and Collective Healing in Colombia. So a little bit about me. I am a psychology and Latin American studies major. I'm from the class of 2024, and I'm a first-generation Colombian American from Medellin, Antioquia. My mom is from Medellin and my dad is from Bogotá, but I have a much deeper cultural connection to Medellin because I've had the privilege of visiting my family in Medellin since I was 5 years old every summer, which I'm really grateful for and has really allowed for me to connect with my culture in a really meaningful way. And growing up, I just felt so lucky to be identify with such a beautiful country and culture. And as you can see, I've featured pictures of just how beautiful Colombia is. But at the same time, very early on, I started to notice a lot of conversations about violence, with everyone that I encountered in Colombia. And I just couldn't really wrap my head around how everyone I met was impacted by violence in a country and a culture that was so beautiful to me. And it was really interesting to see this because everyone had a connection to the violence. Everyone knew a loved one or a family member that had been lost or impacted. And it was really interesting to see that the way that people talked about this, because it was almost like when they told the story, the moment crystallized, the story crystallized the moment, and it was just told with such emotion and vivid detail that you could just tell that this was a really powerful experience. So I'd like to give some context on the ongoing conflict in Colombia. There are a few political actors involved, and basically the Colombian government, far-right paramilitary groups, and far-left guerrilla groups have been in this conflict for over 60 years now, and they've kind of been fighting for dominance and territory. And in the process, urban and rural communities have been caught in the crossfires. And as a result of all of this, there has been a huge amount of collective trauma that's been created in Colombia, as hundreds of thousands of disappearances, kidnappings, killings, and cases of displacement have occurred. It's not quantifiable, honestly. I tried looking up statistics, and it's just not possible to quantify because of how large scale it was. But luckily, there have been some good steps in the right direction towards peace with the Colombian Peace Accord of 2016, in which members of the FARC guerrilla group, which is the oldest guerrilla group in Colombia, signed a treaty with the Colombian government vowing to disarm and reintegrate into civil society. And this was a huge, hopeful step, but at the same time, this has been met with a lot of polarization, hostility, and stigma. A lot of people really view guerrilleros as villains and criminals. And as a result, violence has continued. A lot of people have been violent towards guerrilleros who have been reintegrated. And as a result, a lot of guerrilleros have returned to criminal activity. And this has just really generally deepened the inability to heal. And the most important thing about this conflict is that this conflict is incredibly complex. There's no villain or hero, and that's a lot of the language that is tied to conflict relates to villain and hero and victim and victimizer. And in the situation in Colombia, it's just not possible to do that. And I think it's really difficult for Colombians to understand that. So what is this Tejiendo Miradas? This was the project that I supported this summer at the University of Antioquia in Medellin, Colombia. But the Tejiendo Miradas project invites former FARC-EP guerrilla groups to narrate their experiences from before and after the Colombian Peace Accord of 2016 through embroidery. And the pieces featured in this book, which is right here, were created by ex-combatants and reinsertados, which are the people that are being reintegrated into society, who are living in communities that were created by them, kind of as transitory places between living in the bush, living in the jungle, and reintegrating into civil society. And these places are called San Jose de Leon in Mutatá and Llano Grande in Dabeiba. And the book also features pieces created by their new neighbors and family members, which makes this book especially powerful. And the goal of Tejiendo Miradas is really to just share experiences that people know little about or are not as inclined to learn more about. And in the process, the project kind of seeks to facilitate reconciliatory discourse in Colombia by unstitching gazes of the other, or the villain, and illustrating the idea that violence has touched every Colombian. and also just mending wounds and sewing up the voids that separate us. So what is unique about the tejiendo methodology, and why is it so powerful to narrate with needles and thread? So the tejiendo methodology really relies on the idea that manual work is almost meditative and really promotes reflection and introspection, healing and imagining a new reality beyond the one that we are currently in. And in a way, the tejiendo methodology also recognizes embroidery as a symbol for reconciliation, in the same way that when you're embroidering, you're giving it a lot of care and thought and attention to detail as well as patience. Reconciliation is very similar in that sense, and it requires those things as well. And something that's really special about these pieces is the symbolism in the pieces, and you can really see how the imagery seeks not to perpetuate this idea of the villain or the other. It's more illustrative of how every Colombian hopes and dreams for peace. And you can see this in the symbolism of family, friends, landscapes, roads, plants, tears, animals, and hearts. I find that really powerful. And I also have included a quote that kind of describes the experience of like how meditative it is to embroider from an ex-combatiente who is being reintegrated. So my internship, I secured it at La Universidad de Antioquia in Medellin, Colombia, and I was supporting the projects of Dr. Beatriz Elena Arias Lopez, who is a leading specialist in collective mental health in Colombia, which was just an amazing opportunity. I was just so excited, and I really was excited to like deepen my understanding of like the socio-political history in Colombia in my own country from like a more adult perspective, because what I had kind of like been familiar with was like from when I was like visiting and younger, and it was like a very different perspective. I was very excited to explore my growing interest in trauma and practice my advanced Spanish in an academic and professional setting. So I actually did a lot of transcribing field recordings from tejiendo workshops in El Bronx, Bogotá, which is another place in Colombia that has seen a lot of criminal activity and hardship. And I also attended and facilitated tejiendo workshops at La Universidad de Antioquia, where students were invited to embroider their personal experiences. And I supported other projects that kind of investigated similar ideas, such as auto-protection, which is methods of resisting against conflict that are nonviolent and centered on actually protecting and enriching the community itself. So I did want to feature some of the pieces created by excombatientes in the book. So this one, the book is kind of, all of the embroidery pieces are separated in the book by themes. So this is recorridos, which is one of the themes, or journeys. This piece is particularly powerful because it describes, the creator kind of describes how when they left behind their gun, when they were being reintegrated, it was almost like losing a close friend and a protector and like a family member, just because that was the only thing keeping them safe for such a long time. And I just thought that was a really powerful story. This section is called arraigos, or roots. And here you see two people shaking hands and a weapon on the ground that has been dropped to the ground. And the creator kind of describes how here they're shaking hands, and after so much fear, they're able to come together and put down their arms and shake hands, which I thought was really powerful. And this is the roots section of this book kind of talks about how like these guerrilleros are now taking root in a new life, in a new reality, after being reintegrated after the Colombian Peace Accord. This section is called confianzas, or trust. And here you see people playing soccer together, which is really cool. And the artist talks about how soccer and sport is kind of a way for the excombatientes and the civilians to kind of, connect in a way that they weren't able to before. And then this one is called compromisos/commitment. And this, I'll translate it, but it says, hopefully God will allow that this peace will last a long time, and so that our grandchildren will not have to live what we lived. It speaks for itself. Like, it's just so powerful. And this next piece also says Las FARC, which is the guerrilla, wants peace and reconciliation. And I guess this really goes to show like FARC ex-combatientes and ex-combatants like also are very much determined to achieve peace in Colombia, and violence is no longer something that anyone has ever wanted or wants for the future. So for my takeaways, I think academically, this really left me with a lot of lingering questions and deepened my interest in individual and collective trauma. So some of the questions that I was left with was, how does trauma influence our ability to reconcile? Does reconciliation have a meaningful process in the process of, meaningful place in the process of healing trauma? And how can we reconcile while also honoring our emotions and experiences that accompany those traumas? And how can the methodology in this tejiendo be applied in other contexts? And I think something that was also very interesting was see cross-cultural comparisons of psychology and approaches to psychology. I think the West is very quick to pathologize very real and human experiences that accompany traumas, for example. And I think it's something that has really shaped the way that I think about psychology now. And personally, I think that this experience this was one of the most powerful experiences I've had in my life. And I think it really made me think about cultivating my sense of empathy in every area of my life and understanding that conflict is a very complex thing because people are complex. And in the process of recognizing that people are complex, also being able to forgive myself for the mistakes that I make and forgiving others for the mistakes that they make, because we're all human. And most of all, I feel so grateful to be Colombian, and I just feel so blessed and lucky to be human as well. So now I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Anchor Point Foundation and the Albright Institute for their support, as well as my advisor, Professor Danilo Antonio Contreras, who's my major advisor and my tenure advisor, Beatriz Elena Arias Lopez at La Universidad de Antioquia, which she was my advisor for my internship, and the Anchor Point Fellow Network that has just been such a supportive system throughout this entire internship and experience. So thank you guys very much. That's my presentation. Can you repeat the last part of what you said? I'm sorry.
I was wondering if the choice of embroidery as the form for the project was influenced by any connection with the traditional arts in Colombia.
I think something that we talked a lot about in my internship was that embroidery is just traditionally in Colombia something that is very commonplace. It's just something that happens in the household, in domestic settings, women are always embroidering. So it's something that's very familiar in Colombian culture, and I think that's why it's especially effective. And I think in informal ways, not necessarily in investigative settings, a research project, embroidery has been a form of expression for people everywhere in Colombia. Yeah, if that answers your question.
Another question for Isa. I was wondering if you got to have any in-person interaction with these people, and how that impacted you.
So it's a little bit complicated. I think me being an American is a factor in how exposed I can be to certain settings in Colombia, and if you're kind of picking up what I'm putting down, just because of the political relations. So I actually was not doing much of interacting with ex-combatientes or reintegrated people, or I wasn't really in any rural settings where conflict was actually occurring. I think it was more hands-off than I was expecting, yeah.
You did pressure